The following video is a short sample from the MPC Masterclass series available on the Patreon link down below. In this video, we're going to dive into the sampling abilities of the MPC. The MPC, over the course of history, started as a sampler and then evolved into what it is today. So in this video, we're going to go over everything you need to know about sampling on the MPC. Now, before we actually dive in and start sampling on the MPC, there's a couple of concepts and menus that we want to be aware of on the MPC. The first one is the concept of the sample pool. Now, if we go into the browser, which we can do either by clicking on the browser icon or finding where it says load on your MPC and clicking on that. Now that we're in the browser, at the lower left, we have sample assign. What this will do is show us everything that's inside of the sample pool. Now, inside of the MPC, the sample pool is essentially every sample that is associated with this project. And the samples can live in two places. One, the samples can live directly in the memory of this project, and also on newer MPCs, you can have disk streaming. So the sample will live inside of the project. However, it will not be stored in the RAM of the project. It will be stored on the disk, and when you play that sample, it will actually stream the disk into the project and not take up memory inside of that project. This really only comes into play if you have really long samples. Let's say you're doing a live performance and you have a bunch of backing tracks. I would suggest using disk streaming for something like that. And after we get some samples into the MPC, we'll come back here and go over how we allocate a sample to be either based on disk streaming or inside of the memory of the project itself. So this is the sample pool. And again, how do we get there? We go to the browser, and then from the browser, we go to sample assign. And here we can see everything that's loaded into our project. Since we haven't started anything on this project, it's complete blank slate. It tells us that there's nothing in here, but we're going to actually jump in and start sampling. So that is the sample pool. The next concept or menu we want to be aware of is the actual sampler itself. Every MPC will have a dedicated sampler button, and you can either get there by using that button. Here on the Live 3, it is Shift and Sample Edit, or a double click. Because it's in red, we can either go Shift, now we're inside of the sampler, or we can just double click, and now we're inside of the sampler. Or if you want to use a menu option for that, we can go into Menu and then go to our sampler icon, which is a little record player. We can either click on that, or like we've seen in previous videos, if we just press and hold Menu, now these pads are shortcuts to everything on the screen here. So we can just click the upper left. Now that we're inside the sampler, let's take a look at everything that's going on the screen so we know how to navigate around this menu. First, let's take a look at the input menu here. And to open that up, we can either just highlight it in red and click on the encoder, or double click with our finger. Now we're in the input select menu. Now the first thing you'll see is all the stereo tracks on the top, followed by all the mono tracks on the bottom. And since this is an MPC Live 3, we have a whole bunch of USB options going on right here. Now, depending on your MPC, your input selection may look different. You may have input 1 and 2. You may have input 1 and 2, 3 and 4 if you're on something bigger like the MPC X. And then below that, you'll have all the different inputs just in mono. Now, one thing to note on the Live 3 is that you can change what is going into this input 1 and 2. Just really quickly, if you're watching this with a Live 3, that is under the input menu right here, which is below the mixer. So let's double click on that. And here is where we're going to say what is coming in through the input 1 and 2. And this is the analog input chain. So right now, nothing is selected. We have the combo jacks up here that we can select, 1 and 2 of the combo jacks, or we can come in through the RCA, or we can come in through this microphone right here. And we've covered this in previous videos, but regardless of whichever input you have coming in, this slider at the bottom is going to be your input of the volume coming in to the MPC. So if you do see a signal coming into your MPC, but when you record the sample, it's too quiet, this is where you want to come back into this input page and just increase the incoming sound gain coming into the MPC. If you're on something older like an MPC 1 Plus or a Key 37, you actually have a physical knob back here to adjust how much input is coming in. But let's go back to the sampler here, and let's say we're coming in this scenario, we are coming in through USB 1 and 2 because I have my phone connected here to the MPC. So now that I have USB input 1 and 2 selected, If I actually come into my phone and play some audio, we're going to see the incoming signal coming in here. Here's the signal coming in, but as you can hear, I'm not actually hearing anything coming in. This is where we'd need to adjust the monitoring, which is down here, and it's a little bit grayed out. It can be a little hard to see at times. So I'm going to change that to in, and then when we play this audio again, we are going to hear the audio coming off of the phone. Now, if you are just getting into sampling and learning the art of sampling, one little pro tip is using a website like Who Sampled is a really cool way to see where the original samples came from and then what the producer did in order to make it into the track that it was. So in this scenario, we're looking at a song called Overnight Celebrity by Twista. It was produced by Kanye West back in 2004. The cool thing about Who Sampled is it will show you all the tracks that were sampled in order to make this song, at what point they appear, and you can jump to them. So you can take a look at the original track and then listen to what was produced and released and see what they did. So if you listen to Overnight Celebrity and compare it to the originals, what they did in Overnight Celebrity is they sampled it and then they sped it up. So we're going to go over some of that in this video. But let's go back to this menu before we actually start sampling off of the phone. Let's take a look at everything else that's going on here. Now, we just changed our monitor to in so we can actually hear the incoming signal of whatever audio source is coming in. So next to the monitoring, we actually have the threshold slider. Now, the threshold slider basically triggers automatic recording when the sound source passes by the threshold slider. So the way we would have to use this as an example is we'd have to turn it up to whatever level we think the audio is going to be passing by. And again, we can always see that when we play back and we see how high the audio is. And then we'd have to arm the sampler to record. So if we set the threshold, let's say to -20, and then come in here and hit record, you can see that it's waiting. And as soon as I hit play, it's going to get that signal and then trigger the recording. No matter what you do. Now, as you noticed here, automatically it stopped the recording. Now, why did it automatically stop the recording? I'm going to hit discard on this right here. It automatically stopped the recording because down here we have a maximum length set to 4 seconds. So if you're sampling and you find that the sampler just automatically turns off, you'd want to come down here and actually crank this up. So we're going to crank this up to, let's say, 3 minutes. And now what's going to happen is if I arm this to record, we hit the threshold, this is going to be recording for the maximum of whatever I set down here below on my maximum length. So record. And I hope you understand me, every word. And as you can see, it's just going to keep recording as long as I want within the range of this maximum level. Now, one thing to note on the MPC, sometimes if you're using something that has a really hard beginning transient, like you're sampling a specific kick drum or a snare, sometimes this threshold doesn't respond quick enough and you miss the very first part of that very heavy transient on drums. So in those kind of situations, and also in a lot of situations, what I typically tend to do is just avoid using that threshold and then sampling in and then chopping the sample afterwards. So that is the incoming threshold. Now, next to that, we have a tuner. So as we've seen in previous videos, if you are using like a instrument input, you have a tuner here to tune your guitar or tune your bass. And then over here, we have the auto sampler. Now we're going to have a dedicated video about the auto sampler, but essentially what that allows you to do is connect an external synthesizer or any sound source that can receive MIDI and go through and make a key group, which is a multi-sampled instrument inside of the MPC automatically. You essentially, inside of the auto sampler, you have a big menu here, which we'll go over in a future video, and you can make a key group preset based off of any connected synthesizer that can receive MIDI. It's going to trigger the sound, record the sound back in, and go through note by note, and then create an instrument that you have now inside of your MPC. That's a little bit more in depth for this video. We will have a future video on that. But just so you know what this icon is, it is going to be the auto sampler. So down at the bottom here, we actually have different modes that we can use for sampling into the MPC. Sample is your basic one. I'm going to grab a sample. We're going to get a pop-up screen asking me what do I want to do with that sample, and then I save that sample. Now, Slice actually allows us to create slices while the sample is playing back simply by hitting the pad, and it will start a new slice on that pad while recording one long sample. Pad tap is going to be recording the sample as soon as I hit that pad. And then pad hold records the sample only while I'm pressing and holding that pad down. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start over here on pad hold just so we get an idea of how each one of these work. Now with pad hold, remember, it only turns on while I'm pressing and holding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play back this sample for a little bit, but I'm only going to grab little snippets, and it's only going to be recording while I'm pressing the pad down. So we're going to play this back, we're going to hear music, and I'm going to grab a couple of little parts of this track playing back, but I'm going to take pauses here and there just so you can see grabbing a short sample and grabbing a long sample.